Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jodi Gaines, President of the New York MBA and also Chief Client Officer of the InsightOne family of companies. Before we get started with today's webinar, we'll just go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you are having any technical issues, please use the chat function to notify us. During today's webinar, all lines are muted except for our presenters. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by using the Q&A function, and all questions will be visible to everyone unless you select to share your questions only with the panelists. And the slide deck will be available and forwarded to all attendees after the webinar. A little bit about New York MBA. So New York MBA brings value to you, your company, and your career. We are serving members throughout the state, integrating 5 regions, and we are committed to helping you serve the lending and servicing business in New York. New York is the one regulators and lawmakers reach out to when seeking input on industry matters. We are very excited to present today's webinar, Climate Changes to Real Estate, New York in 5 to 10 years, and Tech Solutions to Help You Thrive. Everyone in our industry, and we could say everyone everywhere, regardless of what industry you're in, is impacted by climate change. And when you read the headline news, it can be overwhelming. The best thing that we can do is be prepared for the issues so we can plan and address and be prepared as issues come and we're faced with them. Our panelists have a great presentation discussing everything from what you should be aware of, suggested timing of potential impacts, a tech demo of Earthvisionz technology. And then Baker from MSI will follow up and discuss how this technology is utilized to communicate with MSI existing clients to help protect their assets and more. Now, to introduce today's presenters, we have Carla Johnson, who is the CEO and founder of Earthvisionz, which Carla founded in 2011. Carla is a climate expert, geologist, hydrologist, environmental engineer, and entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in the geospatial sciences, 3D virtual Earth software development, real-time operations management software, environmental hydrogeology and engineering, and is a technical expert witness for some of the largest environmental litigations in U.S. history. She's currently writing a book on how to survive and thrive the next 20 years of climate change, and has been featured on several podcasts and keynote speaker at conferences and live festival events. Some highlights for Carla, like we said, she's the Earthvisionz founder in 2011. She's also the founder of Waterstone. She is a climate change expert, a pioneer in geospatial and virtual Earth software and technologies. Carla is an international water resource development and protection expert. She's nationally recognized in groundwater flow and transport modeling, and is also an expert witness in litigation support for federal, state, and private clients. Baker Breedlove is the president and CEO of MSI, a leading mortgage field service company. In 2013, Baker joined the InsightOne family of companies, which includes Williams & Williams Auction, iProperty Claims, I1 Recovery Inc., and of course, MSI. As in-house counsel, Baker, he joined as in-house counsel and quickly increased responsibilities, including roles of general counsel of InsightOne and president of iProperty Claims, IPC. Originally from Atlanta, Baker holds a Bachelor of Business Administration's real estate from the University of Georgia and a Juris Doctor from Florida Coastal School of Law. Baker also serves in several boards, including Jacksonville Area Legal Aid, known as JALA, a nonprofit law firm dedicated to providing free civil legal assistance to those who otherwise could not afford it. At this time, I will hand it over to Carla to get the webinar started. Thank you so much.
Unmute. There we go. Hi, good morning. or good afternoon to the New Yorkers. Thank you, Jodi, for the introduction. I appreciate that. And great to have you all today here to talk about probably the most important thing that we can be talking about in modern times right now. I'm going to go over a couple things here. We already went through the introduction. I'm going to go over what some of the climate change models are talking about in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to look at how those are impacting real estate and communities and how that's going to, impact the financial world. Then we'll go into just a quick outlook for New York State and look at some of the financial risks there and opportunities. And then we'll look for some of those adaptation and preparation type of tasks that need to be thought of and prepared for right now. And then I'll give it over to Craig Hoff, who's our CTO and CIO, and he'll do a demo on the technology. So there we go. So one of the things I like to start out saying is that, we have to start telling the truth about climate change. And what that means is that we have to really face on, because it's happening every day. It's in the news every day. It's one of the most talked about things around the world right now. And what you can just see here between in the last 140 years is the mean surface temperature of the Earth and the extreme amount of rise in a short period of time in about the last 20 to 40 years or so. These really impact everything from the oceans to the forests to everything that we're seeing with, I know you guys in New York have seen all the smoke that has been happening from the fires in Canada. Out here I'm in Boulder, Colorado. We've been seeing smoke like this for years. And one of the things, the DoD put out a paper a few years ago that talked about how by the year 2040, they expect to have most of the west of the Rockies, their forests burned. And they are planning to put alternative energy centers out there because it will look a lot like Nevada instead of, a forested mountain region. So what does that really mean? That's it sounds crazy to all of us, but this is where we're going. And for a second, I'm going to talk a little bit about modeling. Why do we need to take these maps seriously? So around the world, there have been the European model, the Australian model, the North American model. They're all called general climate models, GCMs. And years and years ago, they would get together and they would mostly overlap, but there would be some, big distinctions between what those models were predicting into the future. And now, because the world really has a phenomenal amount of sensors and meters everywhere around the world, they're called IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, and they're measuring flooding and temperatures and sea levels and everything from all the way to the satellites to the ground. All that data is being accumulated and put into these models, and those models go back into history using that data. And if those models can replicate the temperature and the climate on the Earth going back into history, then that they are considering that to be a good convergent model, and then they can start doing predictive analysis. So all these massive models are now converged and predicting into the future very, very, very similarly, with very little differences between them. And that's what a lot of the maps that you're seeing, in the New York Times, and when you get onto certain websites, you'll see these maps are starting to become the ubiquitous maps around the country. What this says here is that in less time than it would take for you to pay off a 30-year mortgage if you bought a house today, this is what the temperature changes are going to be. So around the entire, where the darkest numbers, the darkest colors are there, is going to average around 125 degrees for right now, Phoenix is seeing over 100 days of 100+ degrees every year. But now we're going to get to 125 degrees in this kind of area of the country, which is, we've never seen those kind of temperatures before. And what that means is a lot of things, that impacts our surface and groundwater resources, our food variability. There will be a migration of humans and species to the north where it will be cooler. There's going to be border security issues, national security risks. There'll be issues with electricity and sewage and infrastructure, because at that temperature, roads start to melt, tires start to melt, and all the wires that you see hanging around, for our telephone and our internet, et cetera, those also can't withstand those temperatures. So we're really talking about, we have 30 years maximum before we have to start looking at our infrastructure and how we live. This is a map that shows how many weeks per year will be above 95 degrees. And again, in Phoenix, they're seeing, 100 days right now. But you can see all over this map where you can imagine it's getting hotter and hotter. And they're expecting, even in Colorado, for our temperatures and our landscape, et cetera, to be more like New Mexico. Oh, sorry. The number of days that the heat index will be 100 degrees in just the next few years is that you can see the difference between these two models right here, model results. And just even in the next few years, there is a big change in what our heat index is going to look like. The number of days, additional days over 90 degrees by 2050, I kind of zoomed down into this particular model and looked at New York, and you can see that there are, New York in particular and New England is not going to experience as much of the heat change as the rest of the United States, but it does show these regions that are going to be much hotter by 2050. And the wet bulb temperatures are essentially related to death rates. And that means that, humans can really only live in so much heat. And when you add humidity to it, then the death rate skyrockets. So again, in the next 30 years or so, this is where we will see much higher death rates in the United States. And this is the look at the percent of property that will be below the high tide, so flooding areas around the United States, and we'll zoom into New York a little bit more to see that. But you can obviously see that the coastlines are inundated. Florida is going to be hit very hard by this. And then this is an interesting map because it really shows what our percent change in agriculture will look like. So where the purple is that's where the decline in yields will be. So we're starting to lose our agricultural areas in California and in the breadbasket of the United States, where the groundwater and water resources will become scarcer and the temperatures will be too hot to have some of the crops that we've had. But if you look up into New England, it is amazing what you can see as being a opportunity. So that whole region is going to actually either stay stable or increase their ability to grow with both the heat and water resources that will be up there. This is an interesting map also on the impacts of GDP and the decreases in GDP, but look at New England. This is due to the migration of a huge amount of people who will be coming up along the border of Canada and into New England. The highest water resource area in the United States is really going to be along that border. The winters will be less impactful, and so the growing seasons will be longer, and that GDP will actually increase. Nope, that's not there. There it is. What's happening? Sorry. Here's a zoom down to Long Island, downtown New York area where I'm from. So I see, a lot of high tide inundation. In this particular, this is sea level rise. So this just gives you an idea of communities that will be impacted sooner than later. This is again 2040. So in less time that you pay off that mortgage, this is high tide flooding areas. big red flags everywhere up into the Hudson and certainly into the, lower portions of Long Island there. And what does that really mean when you're looking at real estate and you're looking at infrastructure and you're in charge of all this stuff and all these people have to move more inland? It's a very big deal, and there are solutions that are out there, but it is important, again, to really look at this clearly right in the face and say, we've got to make changes right now because we're going to have way too much damage and loss of property unless we pay attention to that. And I pulled this up just to say that over time, as climate change is advancing, we are having hurricanes change their paths. So this is the hurricane routes that have gone through the New England area over the last, I think it was probably 40 to 50 years. And they are usually concentrated over the most eastern part of New England so that they skim the coast there. And hurricanes are interesting because they are nature's way of getting rid of heat in the ocean. They actually pull that water, that hot water that's sitting on the top of the ocean, and right now is starting to slow down and get hotter and hotter. And they bring that water up into the clouds, and then it rains and it cools that water off. So that's why they're getting bigger and more intense, because of how hot the oceans are getting. But these lines are likely to move a little bit more inland as the land itself also gets hot and has a huge amount of humidity to it. So over time, you'll start to see that these tracks will start moving more inland. The opportunity here is to be awake and aware and be in a planning stage so that resilience is probably the most important thing to think about. So when I looked at a rapid adaptation formula for this climate transition that we're going through, there's essentially five things to pay attention to. And that is, you need, and this is for city planners, these are for financial planners, this is for, of course, the mortgage industry, is to really know where all your assets are and which ones are really in a risk zone. So you need to get and assign risk assessments to areas that are going to have high percentage predictability of impact, and map those assets to the 10, 20-year climate models that are coming out right now. And look at that, because there's going to be not only flood areas and tidal surge, and like we just looked at the heat health issues, but there's also places where agriculture, you want to make sure that you are maintaining a large amount of your agricultural land because it's going to be a financial boon in that area. You want to measure and monitor and mitigate anything that is starting to change. So when you have IoT devices everywhere and you've got monitors, you want to have a way to be able to look at all that change that's going on and react to it and respond to it intelligently. So right now, knowing your operational risks and having a resilience plan is important. It is really important for not just emergencies, but it's really the pre-planning part of this is critical, because when you think of infrastructure going out and the roads and et cetera getting hot, the action time is right now to start planning for what will happen with our sewage, what will happen with our water resources, where will we be able to put all of our infrastructure underground so that it is protected in some way. And when you've done that pre-planning and these events happen, you have billions of dollars of less damage because you've actually pre-thought about this. And I gave a talk a couple months ago down in Houston for the AEC industry, which is architecture, engineering, and construction. And I was looking at some of these cities that are being planned right now to be in the South and in Arizona. Is they're planning on putting a lot of places to live underground. They are creating large canyons where people will live on the sides of the canyons, and the center of the canyon will be a sustainable and renewable food source and water processing plant. So people are thinking of how we're going to go into the future in a way that is exciting, brings community closer together, has a way where we are eating more locally, and we're able to actually go through this. You know, the Earth has gone through 13 ice ages and 13 warming periods, and the humans have made it through the last few warming periods. So we are able to do this. We've got the technology to do it. We've got the creativity to be able to get through it. But planning is critical, and knowing what you're planning for is the most important thing. And so with that, I'll close up and I will hand this over to Craig Hoff, and he'll do a demo for you on particular technologies that might help you get through this time period.
Thank you, Carla. So I'm Craig Hoff, CTO of Earthvisionz, and wanted to take a couple of minutes to look at some of the tech solutions we've built here. You know, based on some of the things that Carla was talking about, it's been really important for us as a company to really see how we can help our customers face the challenges that are coming because of climate change, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. So what we're going to look at very briefly, we're going to go through this pretty quickly, is how we help in a couple of different areas, what we do in terms of data aggregation, real-time intelligence, and visualization. Then we'll look a little bit at some of our solutions related to weather and disaster tracking and alerting. Of course, as Carla said, some of these types of disasters related to flooding, hurricanes, etc., are going to continue to increase over the coming years, and we need to be ready for those. We'll be looking at smart cities and risk potential, and some of the ways that the IoT devices that Carla mentioned can really be put to use to help us to have a more resilient future. And then finally, we'll talk about what we do in the areas of operations with field and fleet communications and management to help organizations to manage their resources more effectively as they face these issues. Today, we're going to go through several technologies associated with several different products that Earthvisionz has. We'll be looking at some things from the VAST and V-Alert platforms, which help our customers to do real-time asset management and alerting. We'll also look at a couple of the mobile apps that we have that are connected to these products, especially Drive Tracker, our driver and fleet operations tool, and also Field Team Tracker, which is related to managing disparate field teams in geographically widespread areas. So first, data aggregation, real-time intelligence and visualization, globally, in North America, and locally. So this is what you're seeing here is the VAST platform, where we bring in lots of different real-time information from a variety of different types of data sets, which can include weather data. It includes infrastructure data. Seen here is U.S. electricity infrastructure, and where all of the high voltage, long distance power transmission lines, electrical substations, and power plants are located. And then also the fact that we pull in tens of thousands of gauges and monitoring stations to be able to provide information about what's happening in real time and how that affects our customers. So what you're looking at here is a network of thousands of flood gauges located all across the US and what's happening with them in real time. And then, of course, what we do on top of that is to aggregate our customers' location data, wherever it is, whether it's spread all across the US or even the world, or whether it's concentrated in an area like New York. We can provide information about how all of those other things that we're aggregating together are impacting your individual properties and locations that you need to manage through our system. So next, we're going to look at a couple of different examples related to weather and disaster tracking and alerting. We'll look at how we helped our customers in Hurricanes Ian and Harvey, and particularly with Ian, kind of how we collaborated with MSI to make sure that their bank customers were well informed about what was happening with that event. Then we'll look at some of the recent severe tornadoes, particularly in Rolling Fork, Mississippi. And then we'll look a little bit at some of the recent air quality issues that have been experienced in the Northeast and how we've helped our customers track those things, as well as with public health issues. So when Hurricane Ian started to develop last fall, we partnered with MSI to be able to provide actionable intelligence to their bank clients before, during, and after the event. So that included things like providing screenshot views like this one seen here for individual bank clients, showing where their portfolio was of open mortgages and where the track was going to be, being able to provide them with information about which particular properties were in the path of the storm. And in addition to just a generic, it's in the path of the storm, it's in the cone of uncertainty of where the storm might go, we were also able to provide much more granular information on several of the different types of hazards that came about because of the storm. One of the most impactful parts of Hurricane Ian was the storm surge that occurred in and around the Fort Myers area. So we were able to provide information about what specific properties were going to be impacted by storm surge and at what level, which properties would experience storm surge of levels of 1 foot, 3, 6, or even more than 9 feet above sea level. We also looked at wind impacts, which properties were in the path of the storm where hurricane strength winds were experienced and were likely to have had significant damage due to that. We, of course, also looked at the amount of precipitation, the excessive precipitation that occurred during the storm, and which properties experienced as much as 14, 20, or more inches of rain during the storm period. And then the other thing that we did was using satellite technology, being able to provide heat maps and near real-time photography showing what the impacts were for individual properties and areas. In this case, the red shows the areas that had the most damage from the storm. As you can expect, much of that was along the path of the storm directly, and a lot of it was coastal, experiencing extreme amounts of storm surge. So here you can see before and after photography for one of the properties that we were monitoring. On the left side, you can see the before image, and then on the right side, the after image. And what we were able to show is the amount of destruction that was occurring, whether properties experienced a partial or total loss because of the storm impacts. And of course, we weren't just sending screenshots to customers and links to have live views of their properties and how they were being impacted as the storm moved northeast, but also spreadsheet reports and other things to provide them with actionable intelligence. Moving on to Hurricane Harvey, this was another case in which we had to provide information for a large number of customers. And so we were looking at thousands of properties that we were managing for one particular mortgage field services company in Harris County, Texas, near Houston. During the course of the storm, we looked at what was happening, which properties were likely to be impacted. We looked at the floodplains and what the expected impacts would be because of that. We sent out alerts to our clients, letting them know of the impacts that they could expect and allowing them to be prepared. And then we looked after the storm got started at the areas that were being flooded. Seen here in brown are the areas where there is standing water, because of course the storm went for many days. And you can see that it actually extended well beyond the anticipated floodplain area because of changes to the built environment since the floodplains were last updated. One of the things that was a particular challenge with this storm was just the number of days that rivers and waterways were above sea level, above their normal level. You can see here for about a week at this particular point, there was flooding, so it didn't subside as quickly as it normally would. Our tools allowed our customers to be able to send out field teams to be able to track what was going on at individual properties, take photos, attach documents, record notes, and be able to understand what was happening and communicate that back to the home offices. We are also able to provide information to customers in terms of resources that they might need, where were all of the generators that could be sourced, or other types of resources in the area. Moving on to tornadoes, what we do as a company as a whole is data aggregation. So we're providing information from a variety of sources that allows us to hit the sweet spot of being able to both say what is happening in real time, but then also to supplement over the coming hours with additional data sets that provide more granular impact. So for example, when this tornado occurred, we were able to provide, of course, the kinds of things that come from the National Weather Service, watches and warning information, letting our customers know about risks, but also after the tornado hit, immediate notifications about where the funnel cloud made landfall, which assets that was near, and then be able to add to that information about the tornado tracks and exactly what level of damage, EF level of damage occurred at each particular property. So for example, if we look at this hospital that was indicated as having damage early on, we can see that there was EF1 level damage in the vicinity, causing about 20% roof cover damage to the hospital. And if we look at another property that was right in the middle of the tornado track, we can see that before imagery and then also the after imagery, we can see that there was total loss to this property. And then I wanted to also look briefly at some of the areas we help in terms of air quality, public health, et cetera. So of course, with the recent wildfires in Canada have caused extreme issues with air quality in New England, as you can see here, causing many areas to have air quality alerts, and some of the air quality readings being in those areas where they're particularly dangerous to human health. We can see how bad things were at particular times, with readings over 400 indicating very hazardous conditions. So again, our technology allows us to provide that information to our customers in a quick way so they can take appropriate action. We also were very involved during the pandemic with providing daily reports to our customers of what was going on, and we're prepared to do that with any future pandemic or public health issue. I would want to move on from there to smart cities and risk potential related to that, in particular portfolio management, building management, how we integrate IoT devices like live cams and sensors, and some of the contextualization capabilities that we provide. What we do with our software is allow our customers to be able to upload the portfolio of properties that they need to manage, and then share that information with their customers so that they can see where their properties are and what's going on with them in real time. You can search and filter down to just a few properties, get spreadsheet reports, zoom down to individual properties with all of the information that you need, information that you provide, and then information we source from data partners provided in the view. You can overlay things like floor plans on the map, get 3D views of properties from different angles, and be able to get an access to a gallery of photos. You can also attach documents, including ones that are updated in real time, like, for example, this property summary report for the most recent appraisal for this building. We also allow you to connect to 3D models, panos, and other kinds of tours so that you can see what the exteriors and interiors of properties would look like, and be able to have a real sense of what this environment is inside and out. We provide various kinds of measurement tools, allowing you to be able to, for example, measure the perimeter of a property, or do other kinds of measurements that you might need, any kinds of map tools that might be of value to you. And those that information then gets stored into the profile and can be accessed for later use. And then we also allow you to tie in various types of IoT devices, as we mentioned. Those can include live cams, as for this highway near the building in Austin, Texas. It can also include various types of sensor gauges. So for example, here you can see where we're monitoring solar panels on the roof of a building and looking at the comparison of power generated versus power used. And we can provide alerts based on when certain thresholds are met. Maybe power generation isn't what is expected, and that could indicate some kind of a problem. We also allow, through our contextualization tools, to be able to look at risk levels and other factors that would impact particular properties. For example, if we looked at downtown Manhattan, lower Manhattan, we can see where there's risk today of flooding based on floodplain data, but we could then also look at how that is impacted over time due to climate change and additional areas that would be impacted from that. We can look at crime scores, and we can also click on any building or area that we want and see where resources are, whether that be parking or whether that be to understand who the tenants are in any building. Finally, we want to look briefly at the tools we provide to help with field and fleet communications and management. With Drive Tracker, which focuses on route optimization, real-time conditions, and Field Team Tracker, which helps with field team tasking and task management. So first, Field Team Tracker, this is what the mobile app looks like. And what it does is it allows remote field teams to be able to provide their status, availability status, and also their location through the built-in GPS of their phones, so that managers back home can see where all of their resources are, what their status is, and assign appropriate resources to tasks. For example, we might pick somebody who has the appropriate credentials for a task that needs to be done and send them a message asking them to do the work. They would get the message on their phone and mark that they're on, en route doing that task. And when they're done, check in that they've completed the job so that they can be assigned something else. Finally, Drive Tracker is about route optimization, allowing people like, for example, property inspectors who have to go to many, many locations a day to be able to do so in the most optimal way possible. It includes turn-by-turn directions, takes into account weather and traffic conditions, including road closures and construction, to make sure that the drivers are going in the best possible way and are aware of any hazards they might face. And then they can share that information with coworkers. They can share their GPS locations through the app, and customers can then see a complete view of all of the assets they're managing, whether they be fixed assets or mobile assets like personnel and vehicles, and zoom down to particular assets, for example, this vehicle, to see what its status is. Anyway, that's a brief tech overview for Earthvisionz. Our mission is to be the top real-time visual command center that turns massive data intelligence into smart action for all communities so we can thrive during climate change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Baker Breedlove from MSI to be able to tell us what they're doing in these areas.
All right, and thank you, Craig. I hope you can hear me. Raise your hand if you cannot. So my name is Baker Breedlove. And I am the president and CEO of MSI. I am not a scientist. I am joining from Florida, which is probably one of the most at-risk states to climate risk. And just anecdotally, we see some of the impacts kind of manifesting already. Going down to South Florida, you see some sunny day flooding. Had to roll up the pants to walk through some parking garages just to get to cars without any rain event at all. So it's clear that climate change is not really up for debate. It's a matter of how quickly is it happening. We know our models are imprecise. It doesn't mean they're wrong. And so we certainly have to just create some practical modeling and next steps to address this. So kind of from a practical property preservation perspective, I'll speak to, and we'll talk about before a weather event occurs, after a weather event occurs, and some hazard insurance considerations as well. And so as far as before an event is concerned, truly understanding the implications and risk of MSR valuations, property valuations, the portfolio risk, and dealing with the potential impacts to the homeowner and the valuation of these properties. 30 years is a long time for a mortgage. A lot of models have a lot of change occurring over the next 30 years. And there's a lot of uncertainty in there. And so if I'm sure many servicers have some very sophisticated models out there, but this is certainly going to be only more important in the coming years. And from a more preservation perspective, when I think about MSI, for example, having a plan with our clients and establishing business rules, integrating with the right partners so we can make data-driven decisions in real time. And the ability to respond well to an event requires that pre-planning, some integration. What's our portfolio? Where's the weather event? The having more data is not necessarily the answer. It's having meaningful data. And so as you just saw, some of these mappings and confidence scores are very, very helpful in our ability to prioritize, triage, and react to an event. It helps us prepare our crews to say, hey, get out, get out of the high risk areas. Some people stay. I think about hurricanes in Florida, and some Floridians are very reluctant to leave. And having a process in place to check in on the health and safety of the crews, of potentially the mortgagors, all of that groundwork has to be laid well in advance of the storm. And then as far as the property insurance, we'll hit on this a little more in a couple of slides, but making sure we have the appropriate coverages in place. Not here to speak about the economy, but we know that inflation is very rampant, and it's particularly rampant in construction. And I can tell you that I don't think insurance policy limits have been increasing at the rate inflation has been increasing. And so that $200,000 or $300,000 in coverage that we had 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when a policy may have been set may be woefully inadequate for a rebuild or to repair the damages in today's environment. And so having that process in place to make sure those coverages are correct. And then beyond just climate risk, this data can be used very practically speaking. So I think about things like snowfall and removal, grass cuts, and scheduling around events, not just huge hurricane and wildfire events, but just practical day-to-day events. And so we have some rule-based automation internally at MSI where we do things like measure the snowfall accumulation that accounts for things like snow melt after the last snow removal. And so we're able to be much more precise about maintaining that property outside of just a large, catastrophe. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So a whole new meaning of loss mitigation. And when we say that, we mean not loss mitigation like I think we all know it, but mitigating damages after an event. And so having, we talk about the business rules in place, but triaging some of these properties. Just because a property is in a FEMA disaster code does not make it the top priority. There may be a property outside of FEMA disaster zone that is higher risk based on its property specific conditions. Maybe it's low elevation, maybe it's really susceptible to wind damage, maybe it's more susceptible to fire damage. And so, we start, of course, with health and safety of our crews, of our employees, of our clients, the general safety and welfare of the public, and then we move to asset protection. And so making sure those rules are in place, the communication channels are open, communication channels failing is often something that we're preparing for and making sure we have backup plans in place there too. Which leads me to borrower outreach. This data can be used to much more precisely contact borrowers and not just kind of send mailers or start phoning people these disaster zip codes, but very specific properties that are the most at risk, which is directly related to having targeted property inspections. I think the theme of disaster, kind of zip codes, is just very broad and blanketed. When with the technology we have today, we can be much more precise and hopefully limit any unnecessary work and get to the more problem properties quicker. So lastly, I'll speak briefly here to some insurance considerations. We talked about appreciation and policy limits, but looking at disasters and some of the data that we have, it starts really with placing the right policies. And from a servicer perspective, especially if we're dealing with force-placed insurance, the servicer's interest in that property is the debt. It's not the replacement cost value by any means. Typically, you're entitled to the lesser of the cost of the loss, the debt or the policy limits. And so making sure you're not over or underinsured, because that interest changes rapidly when you turn to post-sale. And so when you have a post-sale property, you're going to be dealing with, you're going to stand in the shoes of an owner, and your interest is going to be the lesser of simply the replacement cost or the policy limits. And so making sure that you're catering your insurance policy limits to cover your interest is critical. And we see that a lot of servicers aren't necessarily saying, hey, my interest just tripled, I'm going to go change my insurance coverage to triple as well. Yet when you do that, you're either overpaying, underpaying, or being overinsured or underinsured. Both scenarios are not favorable. And then we talk about processes as well, having a process to notify insurance carriers of a change in risk. We look at things like retail policies that require a change in risk upon a change in ownership or vacancy. A lot of times after a storm, there's a vacancy. Having a system that is able to notify the proper carrier at the proper address of the proper event. These are steps to take in advance. And then the last kind of sub item here is the additional payee and making sure that you, the servicer, are properly protecting your interest, and that check doesn't somehow make its way to a borrower that maybe buys a monster truck, for example, and that's a real life example, by the way, that should have been applied toward the debt to protect the mortgagee's interest. To speak to flood insurance is a very rapidly growing risk, in our opinion. The flood insurance program, the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, it's almost like the debt ceiling. It's approved year after year, and in the event it's not approved, major implications come from that. So the NFIP changed their risk rating to what they call risk rating 2.0, which is forward-facing risk, and that increased premiums for a lot of people, but it still subsidizes the real cost of the risk substantially. And so what we're doing from a regulatory perspective is incentivizing people to live in higher risk areas where the ultimate payer is the taxpayer. The NFIP fund is not fully paid for by the policyholders. And so the NFIP, again, it comes up for renewal in September of 2023. If that changes, the regulations around that change, or it's not renewed, a lot of homeowners are going to find themselves without the ability to get flood insurance, or the premiums are going to substantially increase. And as the cost of ownership increases, property values and default rates can be impacted as well. And that should be taken into consideration when assessing portfolios and MSR valuations. And then some of the data that we've walked through from with Earthvisionz and other companies out there could be used to support losses when we're looking at dates of loss, causes of loss. Was this a flood? Was this a roof? Sometimes you look at Ian, for example, and there's often, the house is just destroyed. Was it washed away by a flood? Was it, did it cave in from wind? Was it contributory events? These matter when it comes to getting proper coverages because the policies are very specific. And so having good data available to reference to support those losses can be of significant value after a storm as well. So that's all I have.
Baker, thank you so much. And Carla and Craig, thank you as well for here's great information that we're able to share with our participants today. Not just great information, but lots of good solutions, right? And how to be best prepared. Things that we've got to be thinking about from a real estate perspective for sure. I also wanted to share with this group, so we will distribute the presentation after today's webinar wraps up. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our panelists or Christina Wiley, our executive director, or myself. Also, you want to recognize and thank our education committee, the New York Education Committee, for putting on today's webinar. So thank you to Kathy and Lisa. Coming up this Friday, we have our Affordable Friday webinar. We will be having representation from the Philadelphia Homeownership Center. So look for that. Information is available on LinkedIn as well as our New York MBA website. That will be this Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And for additional information on New York MBA and all the great work that we're doing, including our numerous committees and very active members, feel free to check out our website at nymba.org.